Welcome back to the bunker. My name's John Madden. I'm here in the Timbecon bunker. We're doing the Woodworking Essentials series where all of you woodworkers locked down at home can't get out and about. Well, it's a perfect opportunity to hone some skills. So what we've been doing is mucking about with water stones and flattening water stones and a whole bunch of stuff. We're actually finally going to get to setting the edge on a chisel. So I've got my little chisel here. Looks handle's a bit beaten up, but it's done a lot of work over the years. I don't know, 25 years I've had these chisels. That's the thing about good quality chisels. You pay a bit more for them, but they last. And they don't have to sharpen them as much either, which is the key thing. I've flattened the back. You can tell it's pretty flat because it's just a dull grey colour. Any shiny bits indicates that there's a high spot. This is 99% flat, I think. I mean, but we'll move forward so we don't, well, we'll move forward. To set our main bevel on the chisel, which is the big one, we're going to use a Veritas MkII honing guide. Now this is my personal one. I don't know how long I've had it. It must be at least 10 years now. It's fantastic, all right? That's all I can say about them. What's really nice about them is that it comes with the duva, the guide, instructions. I've even still got the instructions, and I actually did read them. They're worth reading. And you've got a little angle setting jig, which is part of the set. The hardest thing about using this honing guide is not actually setting it, because once you know how it works, it's very easy. The hardest thing is just getting used to handling it in your hands so the chisel doesn't move and fall out of position when you're tightening it. But essentially you've got 3 different guides: high, low and standard. I use standard because I'm going to set this at 25 degrees, which is a standard cabinet or standard bench chisel bevel. And you also have your little guide which has yellow, 25 degrees, very simple. And if you're wondering why it's got all these different settings, is that the high angles are for sharpening things like mortise, chisels, etc., and the low angles are for like paring chisels. So you've got a lot. You can basically sharpen anything that fits in there on this jig. The other important feature of the Veritas MkII jig is the little, setting dial here, which should be set at 12 o'clock. There's a little indicator on here. Set that at 12 o'clock. That'll set the chisel perfectly at 25 degrees when I set it in the jig. Because what you can do with this little dial is that if you turn it around to 6 o'clock, once you've set your bevel in place, it adds a micro-bevel, which is not to say that the chisel will be sharper. It means that the very sharp bit that you have to maintain is minimized to just about 1 millimeter across the edge. Very important feature of this jig. So let's use the jig. You pick up your angle guide, and it's very simple. And it's all in the instructions if you're confused. Comes in the box. You slide this on, there's a little lip just here, just slide that on. And this is approximately a 1-inch chisel, and there's a little indicator here because it's being built for the American market. It's in imperial, and we just line that up with 1 inch and tighten it. Not a hard tighten, just a soft tighten, just so it's firm. And this is what I mean before about it's not hard to use, it's just handling it. So you flip that over, get your chisel with the flat down and insert it into the jig like so, and you slide it right up to this indicator that's on the setting jig, and then you sort of lean over and tighten it. This is the hard bit, and you want to make sure that that flattening bar across there is parallel. There's 2 bars. Make sure they're parallel so the chisel's being held flat on the seat of the sharpening jig, and just tighten them, not over tighten. People tend to over tighten stuff. You want it firm, but you don't want to over tighten. And making sure that's right. Just release that. That slides straight off. That chisel set to 25 degrees. Using the MkII, I've set the chisel at 25 degrees in the sharpening jig. I've also spent a little extra time re-flattening the stone, because after flattening all the back and all that energy that was expelled, I figured it might be smart to just reshape that as well. So we're good to go. Now I'm just going to wet the surface, a little bit of extra moisture, and you place the jig on the stone. I always start away, not back here, away from me. That means when I balance my hands, I grab it like so with my fingers on the front. Not a lot of pressure, just a little bit of pressure. And then my first stroke is back. If you start at the back and push forward, you risk digging into the stones. Always start at the front. Put a little bit more moisture on there. So I've got the chisel back and forward. I try to work across the stone left to right so you don't wear out one particular part of the waterstone, because they are quite soft, these waterstones. I'm using the 800 to start, and do this for the next 3 to 4 hours. And luckily for you, in the COVID-19 pandemic, you've probably got a little bit of time on your hands, so this is a great way to fill it. Okay, so we've been sharpening for, I don't know, 10-15 minutes now. I know it seems like a lot of work, but remember the rule, directly proportional to the level of neglect. Now, you can see here how this bevel, the main bevel now, is nice and shiny, indicating that it's really flat. So it's going to be a nice flat bevel at 25 degrees to this lovely flat back. There's a little bit of discrepancy here. I'd say that when I last sharpened it, I've free-handed sharpened or something and created a little bit of extra unevenness in the tip. So the big advantage of the MkII jig is that it'll deliver a really perfectly positioned bevel. And the nice thing about that is that when I go to resharpen this chisel again, say I drop it and chip it or do something, and I pop it back in at 25 degrees, I don't have to start from scratch. It'll just hit 25 straight up, so that repair job is going to be really, really quick. Okay, so we've been doing this for a little while now, and we created a really lovely flat 25 degree bevel. And the whole time I was trying to think, can I think of some famous sharpening stories to tell while I'm doing this, but you know what, I can't think of a single one. So here's our nice 25 degree bevel, and we're ready to go to the 6,000 stone now to start to polish this edge. Now we've been grinding for a little while now. We've been through all 3 stones, the 800, 1200 and now the 6000. And this bevel has come up into a lovely mirrored finish, free of any blemishes. This chisel's starting to become sharp now, because in the grinding process you've got a lot of little tiny scratches that, you know, is part of the particles grind the metal and to create the shape. And by going to the 6000, you remove those tiny little scratches, so you're honing, you're sharpening the steel blade. What I can do now is employ the little trick using the micro adjustment, bevel adjustment. We move that around to 6 o'clock, and I'll put it back on the stone, and we'll do a few blows to set that micro bevel. And as I said before, this is not about creating a sharper edge. This is about creating an edge that's only tiny, so it's much easier to maintain. A little bit more. Let's have a close look at it. You see that little micro bevel? So I can take it out of the jig now. Put that aside. And on the back you'll feel a tiny little burr. So I'm just going to run that back and forward just to help remove that burr on my 6000 stone. And then we should have what is a relatively sharp chisel. The old classic shaving effect. But let's look at these in situ with the other chisels of what we've achieved here. We've got the 3 stages of this blade. So El Neglecto, Rusty, I'm sorry darling, the one that's been in vinegar, which is a dull grey with all the little crusty bits removed, to a sharpened chisel that's ready for stropping. Ordinarily you'd strop your chisel now and then it's ready to go do some cutting with, but I've left my strop at home, and being locked in the bunker here, I can't get it. So why don't you join us next time here on Essential Woodworking. We're going to make a strop this chisel, and we're going to do a little bit of joinery.